administrative mechanisms, not in the court of public opinion, but in the court of law, and to see how much it can really hold up to scrutiny. I go then to the next slide, please. I did miss one. Could you just go back, because I think this is critical. Just one before that. The SDG 5 and other goals. You know, I spent 20-something years of my life working for children's rights. And one of the things that always struck me, and I'm sure Madam over there will understand, is that rights have limits. And at the same time, they're indivisible, and they're interlinked, and they're independent. And so we have women and girls in their instrumental roles. And I've argued when I was much younger about the viability of that, and you know, they should be subjects of rights and all that stuff. But I'm much older now. So I recognize that all of us have an instrumental role. Men have an instrumental role. Women have an instrumental role. And then we look at girls and women as rights holders. But the reason that I wanted to flag this is that everything that was just said over the last 2 days, and probably will be said on Friday, if we took out women and girls and substituted people of different abilities, indigenous persons, black people, white people, Indian people, the same holds true. Because every woman has multiple markers. I am not just a woman. I am a black woman. I'm a black Adventist woman. I'm a black Adventist professional woman who just happens to be bringing up a daughter on my own, a loving daughter myself, a fabulous sister, because they tell me that, and I wouldn't want what they tell me about you. I think they call me a dictator. That means I have multiple roles that I have to prosecute. And for us to do that, we've got to take a step back from who we are as gender activists and advocates, and understand the context, the true context in which individual women operate as well as women in the collective, hence understanding the sociology of gender. I go now to the last slide. I think one of the things that's always critical for me when I come to a session like this is to have a takeaway. What do I do Monday morning when I go back to my desk, when the euphoria of being with like-minded people subsides? And so I come back to something that has stood me in good stead over the years. The first is to recognize the context. The context of the University of Guyana is so vastly different from the context of any other university that I must understand first what happens. And that holds true for anything. The context in Guyana is vastly different from the context in Angola. But the context range is just not in geography, but in time. And so Guyana in 2016 is vastly different from the Guyana that I left in 1984. I can tell you that. I hardly recognize it. The second point is critical for those of us who are activists and advocates. We must be able to anticipate the backlash and the whiplash. Okay? Now, if we don't do this, we're going to hit a brick wall. Now, the whiplash is what we do to ourselves. So we change the goalposts, we change our approaches, we change everything so quickly that we can't even cope with it. So we suffer from whiplash. And the backlash comes from our sisters, because women are not monochromatic and they're not monolithic. And sometimes they're the ones from whom we get the most backlash. The brothers, they just ignore us. We're just a bunch of but it's our sisters who, on the ground, put up a lot of resistance if we don't understand the context. And so for me in my practice, understanding and anticipating context, but anticipating both backlash and whiplash have stood me in good stead. And then the last one, this is something that I do consistently, and I try when I teach in the classroom and when I apply on a day-to-day basis. I consistently ask two questions. In this instance, we're looking at gender equality and the empowerment of all of us here. What specifically am I doing to achieve gender equality and support the empowerment of women and girls in my portfolio, in my home, in my church? That's the first question. And then the second question is a corollary of the first. And if we don't ask the second question, we will get both backlash and whiplash. The second question is, what is the impact of our current actions, personal and professional, on achieving gender equality and empowerment of women and girls? And we take that one step further, and we ask these same questions of all 17 SDGs. If we don't, then we're not being faithful to our understanding of the principles of human rights. After all, women's rights are human rights. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reynolds, and I think the panelists deserve a better round of applause. Please. Thank you so much. So, we have a question and answer session now, but however, I would like to caution that we formulate our comments into questions. And I'm going to take 4 questions with a response from the panelists, and then we move on, after which we will have an open floor discussion, and recommendations coming from that discussion will then be compiled and submitted to Parliament. So when you are ready to ask questions, kindly indicate by showing hands so that I can go in sequential order.
This observation. But when we decided to plan this seminar here today, or this workshop, we tied it in with the social sector committee meeting. Some of my colleagues are part of that committee. So because we know how MPs, how busy they are, and therefore we had hoped that the session would have concluded by 3 so we can go into a meeting. But I spoke to the chair and asked him that we can be late, and he agreed that we can be late. So I'm hoping by 3:30 would be a good time for us, because this is such an interesting topic. Now, that's not my question. I must say, I was truly motivated by the 3 presenters in terms of the different topics that were raised. I would want to say to Ms. Arab that I was really excited to hear about this CARICOM initiative, because we all thought, right across all our CARICOM countries, that we saw that CARICOM, or we knew that CARICOM had a role to play over the years. Unfortunately, not having somebody there at a women's desk has really been a disservice to our countries. And so things like these, you know, we talk about all those draft sexual, different legislations that were prepared by CARICOM. Those were positive things. But for a while, nothing has been happening. And therefore, that proactive role is missing in the CARICOM countries. And so I'm very happy to hear about this initiative, and I'm sure that it will be beneficial to all of us, because I agree with you that we need data, and you cannot possibly talk about policies in the absence of data. So I'm happy to hear about that initiative, and I do know from our commission we will support any initiative that seeks to provide data for our countries. The second issue that was raised by Dr. Linda P. It's great to have you here, Linda. I know you since when you were doing your first research in Guyana in the early 80s. But you raised the question of urban women in urban sector, in the urban section. But I want to give you a different take. That living in rural areas, I come from rural areas, and when we're talking about the problems of urban centers, I know this is a problem everywhere in the world, big cities, etc., where you see street people and all the things. But there's something that is also critical, because when we talk about the urban sectors, now think about the rural areas. Because when you refer to the study that was made by this Marxist person in France, but we know if you don't try to remove the differences between town and country, you will have perhaps people in the city having all the best access to everything, and the people in the rural areas without access. This is something that we know when you go to the different parts of Guyana, you see, we talk about hinterlands, because of where our country is made up. And therefore, to my mind, while we're talking about urbanization in the way, the study you have made reference to, you also have another problem, and that is what also philosophers need to look at. Because while urban centers are indeed problematic, we need to ensure or to work with programs and policies to encourage people to stay in rural areas rather than wanting to come to the cities that are already overcrowded. So I see the need in this regard that we need to ensure that the differences that are between the town and country we can work to eradicate as far as possible. Because there was a time in this country that somebody who lived at one end of our country must travel to the city to get a bank, how you say, withdraw money or to have a bank account. And there are many things. If you wanted to buy a tractor or some equipment, you have to travel all the way you have been traveling to come to the city. And many years ago, recognition was made of this problem. Because if you say money, time is money. And if you say somebody who's working in the farming area must leave their farm to travel all the way for the whole day to do this, then certainly governments must be able to recognize that you need to resolve those problems and try to perhaps look at it from a different perspective. How can you then try to make those changes? So I want, as you talk about the question of the challenges for urban centers around the world, you cannot divorce that from the fact that you want to keep the people who are living in the rural communities, you want them to stay there as far as possible. But having, not in a very forceful way, but one in which they, on their own accord, will recognize that I have access to all these things. We talk about suicide and depression in our country. And it is a fact that when you are you're living in far-flung areas without access to things, when you are putting on your televisions and you see that, you know, there is a different life out there and there are things that are happening, now something don't match up. So the person who is watching what exists out there and then they look around and they see darkness, no electricity, and so on and so forth, you have a lot of conflict. So I'm raising this because as someone who is working down there with people, that is a matter that has been recognized and it is a problem. And it's not a Guyanese problem. It is a trend that exists everywhere. And I like the idea that Dr. Reynolds, you talked about testing legislation. I think it's a great idea, and certainly it is something that perhaps University of Guyana, and with you as the lead person there, I'm sure that some changes will be made, and hopefully we can have a lot of these researchers who are doing, because you know, we have all our scholars and all our lecturers who are supposed to be doing research. So it would be useful if we can encourage some of them to take on this type of research with a view to ensure that, you know, sometimes it's a question of resources, but university, they have to do that. So I would like to encourage you that way that we can do more research. Sorry, Chair, too long-winded. Very far.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before Nicole take the microphone, I would like to recognize MP Dr. Vindhya Prasad, who has joined us in the House. Welcome, Dr. Vindhya. So she's sitting at the back. I just can't see behind you, but welcome, Dr. Vindhya, and please join us in this discourse. And also our CEO, who has joined us from the Women and Gender Equality Commission. I recognize you in your absence, but you're here with us, so I would like to welcome you here this afternoon. And there's a special lady, Maria Raghubir, who is the admin assistant. I also want to, even though she's not here, she's been working very hard behind the scene. I want to recognize Maria Raghubir here also. And so, Nicole, can you take the microphone?
And I must say I'm very heartened to be here, and all presentations were well done. I worked for over 7 years in specifically HIV and AIDS. And the diet that persons who are on ARVs are supposed to get is a 1,500 calorie diet. My question now is SDG Goal 1, which is to end poverty, because I've read a report about women being the hungriest in our world. This is a report that was published by the FAO pertaining to the world's hungry women. How critical is it for us to achieve Goal 1 if we are going to achieve actually Goal 5? Because I was up this morning doing a bit of research, and on UN Women's website, there are some targets set as they looked at Goal 1, which speaks to ensuring that poor and the vulnerable have equal rights to economic resources, as well as access to basic services and ownership of land, property, etc. Dr. Linda Peake, you use the term feminization of urban poverty. I have looked at this in working with the women that I would have worked with, because I run a support group, and what affected those women in attending and coming to clinic is money. Money to travel, money to food. And if we look at sexual and reproductive health, for most women who die in maternal death, anemia, they're anemic, they're not eating well. So we look at poverty and hunger and how it affects women. Could you expound a bit on the feminization of urban poverty? And to Dr. Barbara Reynolds, you mentioned about the shifting of the goalposts, and how does the shifting of the goalposts affect the achievement of SDG Goal 5? And to this Christine Arab, you mentioned that in looking at the sexual and reproductive health, they stopped at health. Could you explain why that was such a tussle? I thank you.
Thank you very much. I note I'm just one of the 2 males that's remaining. The other 2 they have left. But from a male perspective, I've operated in third world countries and lived in Guyana. Power comes from government, and political parties form government. And speaking as a man, I think women seek to empower women through NGOs. I think that is a mistake that's been made consistently, because the power resides in political parties. And I think if there is one advice I will leave with the women that are here today, is that their strategy needs to change. You need to develop a strategy how to take over political parties. How to take over political parties. I think that is where the equity, it has to start. Because my experience is that the hardest workers in political parties are females. The male get their power from the women in the political parties. That is the reality. You have a picketing exercise, you have something to do. If you have 100 people there, 80 are women. And therefore, I am saying to the females, and Dr. Reynolds asked a question, who empowers whom? I think the female, they have to seek to empower themselves. And I'm advising that the strategy must change. It cannot be done, will not be done as vibrant and as vocal as NGOs are that are dominated by female. In our context, in our society, it cannot be done, will not be done. And I go back to the point. Dr. Reynolds again made the statement about a backlash from women. I have seen in contest people running for offices in political parties. The hall is filled with 70% and 80% women. And when the results come out, of 35 people, they vote for 30 men. And you have women that are capable on the list. And therefore I'm saying to females, to the woman here, I believe fundamentally you have to recognize it is political parties that form governments, not NGOs. And therefore, you have to seek to assert power, your authority within political parties, based on the work you normally do in political parties. And I believe if that strategy is adopted, a lot of the results that you seek it will happen. And the NGOs can be complementary to those activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamilton. And I now move to Honorable Minister Garrido. She indicated that she has to leave for a funeral, so over to you.
Thank you very much for the presentations. They were really, really great. I would like, though, to take up Joe on his how we have to learn, women have to learn to take over political parties. I think we can do that easily, but it's not learning, it's making up our minds to do so. Because as Dr. Reynolds said, women are, I put it my own way, they're harshest judges of our fellow women. And that shouldn't be, it really shouldn't be. I can tell you that because as a politician, an indigenous one, I have suffered that from fellow women. And it just goes to show that I can stand with my 2 feet, raise my head up and say, I don't care a damn. I know where I'm going and this is what I have to do. And they gotta live with that. If you don't adopt that attitude towards your fellow sisters who don't, let's say, simply they look at you and pass you, simple things like that. If you don't have a thick skin as a politician, you know, you would put your tails between your legs and run away. But standing here as a politician, as a woman, you have to be strong, at least in this Guyana. From our own women, we get that, I can tell you. And why, I don't know. But going on, with regards to empowerment, Dr. Reynolds said empowerment, who, how, when. Now, that is a word, is the buzzword, and everybody likes to use it, and you feel all, when you do something and you learn something new, you feel all empowered and use the word empowerment. But I want to look at it now in the context of the indigenous people. Now, indigenous people, because of the remoteness of where we live, we lack opportunities that are here on the coast for, you know, sisters and brothers. And because of our, let's say, humble and trusting demeanor, we are often looked upon as lesser than the rest of the humanity. And because, let's say, you don't have or understand the ways of the city well or towns well, you understand the ways of the forest well, you're judged harshly and put in a little space that is kind of derogative and slightly exotic. But I would like to say that empowerment, the indigenous people are empowered within their surroundings. They can walk in that forest and name the different trees. They can pick out medicinal plants and make their own medicines and cure themselves. They can look in the air and see what type of birds, so many species of birds and fishes and all those things. The empowerment is of a different nature. It's about environment that the city personnel has to come and learn about. So when we talk about empowerment of our indigenous, when we talk about empowerment, we have to realize that our indigenous people also already empowered. And what we have to add is things like quality access to quality education, access to quality healthcare. Because I came back from Guyana only 2 days ago, and drugs take like 6 months. You order it and 6 months to reach there. So things like that, to close the gap, as the President said, between hinterland and the coast. Government got to really work on that. We have to work on that, especially in the social service sector. And I can say more, but that's not
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. And this is the reason why you could have taken. I will now ask the panelists to respond to those four participants.
I will be very brief. I think we can certainly share with the Commission what's been agreed to in terms of gender equality indicators to make sure that everyone is well informed, and we'd be very interested to discuss how we can help deepen measurement. And I will leave the sort of the deconstructing how goal 1 is actually the underpinning goal. It was the same for the Millennium Development Goals, and it continues to be for the SDGs. In the way that the Vice Chancellor mentioned how human rights are interchangeable, so are the goals. There is a full recognition you won't achieve the health goal in the absence of the poverty goal. And your question about why sexual and reproductive health was the tussle. The language that is agreed to right now is sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights, which means that you don't have sexual rights. The distinction that the issue of reproductive rights continues to be highly contentious. And let's be clear, reproductive rights always gets boiled down to abortion, and it should not. The issue of reproductive rights is a lifelong access to the services and the knowledge you need as a man and a woman, a boy and a girl, to be a healthy man and woman, boy and girl. And yes, part of that is the issue of termination of pregnancy, but it often becomes the central point. Sexual rights is about your right to be a sexual individual, also your right to not get pregnant when you choose, also your right to not get married when you choose, the right for you to be lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex, the right for you to be however you would define and interpret. And in a number of regions, sexual rights are interpreted as being anti-cultural because they work against child marriage, early pregnancy in girls, where in countries where that is still allowed, for female genital mutilation, which we are meant to use the term cutting instead of mutilation. So it is a wealth of issues that as soon as you talk about rights in relation to sexual and reproductive health, you get into issues of the family. And there is no region on the planet where that's an easy dialogue. So we've never gone farther. Frankly, governments and regional groupings, and the UN regional groupings matter. The regional groupings are all much more conservative than they were in the 90s when these languages were agreed to. So we've gone as far as we can, and while we know the women's movement is extremely frustrated, unfortunately they're not in the rooms to hear that actually we've also staved off the reduction of that language, which is actually strongly on the table. And for all that CARICOM gets lambasted for its lack of progression around sexual and reproductive health rights issues, they were one of the part of the groups that was pushing back against the different regional groupings that were trying to reduce the language further. So that is a very real reality. I think, sir, I really enjoyed listening to your analysis. I think the single hotbed, glass ceiling, last remnant of resistance to gender equality in every country on the planet are political parties. They are the single main reason why there aren't more women in leadership. The majority of political parties on the planet, their executive leadership are male. So I think the idea, what you articulated, which I think many people wouldn't find fault with is how I think the lady who's with Google or somewhere calls leaning in. Yeah. Women and men together have to work towards gender equality because the lack of it hurts both. It really does. In this region, as the head of UN Women, my dialogue is as much about boys as it is about women. Also trying to help dissect the fact that when we talk about the advancement of girls, very quickly people say, what about boys? That dynamic does a disservice at times, both to boys, but also somehow conveys that because girls are doing well, boys aren't, which certainly isn't the case. And I think the dynamic that every region in the world, including mine, has to get to is it should never be an either or. Yeah, that the true weight of any labor legislation, poverty legislation, if it's not understood that boys and girls, women and men feel that legislation differently, but equally importantly, then you won't have that achievement. I had a discussion with the top party executive in one of the countries in this region, and his statement was essentially, if women want to become parliamentarians, they have to learn to be like men. And of course, that's not what anyone wants. Parliament's meant to reflect its society it serves. And I think where it gets tricky with political parties, and you're all the experts here, is sometimes equality becomes measured as the same. It's not an equal playing field.